And first, I would like to thank you for your coming and welcome to this information meeting on open science. We are here today to share with you some updates and progress on the implementation of the UNESCO's recommendation on open science, which was unanimously adopted by all the UNESCO members in November 2021. My name is Shaofeng Hu. I'm the director of the Division of the Science Policies and Basic Sciences at UNESCO. Today, you see, in particular, I'm very pleased that we will be presenting the key messages from the UNESCO Open Science Outlook, which was launched just last December 2023. The UNESCO Open Science Outlook provides the first global assessment of status and trends in open science in accordance with the 2021 UNESCO Recommendation on Open Science. In this edition, the Outlook provides a baseline against which the implementation of the UNESCO Recommendation on Open Science can be assessed over time, highlighting crucial gaps in the available data and information, and identify areas where there are positive action, initiatives, and trends. In addition, we will use this opportunity to present to you some of the elements of the UNESCO Open Science Toolkit, which have been developed to assist a broad range of open science actors in the implementation of the UNESCO Open Science recommendations. Information on the upcoming monitoring of the implementation of the UNESCO Recommendation on Open Science will also be shared. As you can see from the program, our ADG Natural Science of Ms. Lydia Brito will first provide you with a short overview of the progress made in the implementation of the UNESCO Open Science. And Ms. Anna Pasig, program specialist from our section on science, technology, and innovation policy, will present the key findings of the UNESCO Open Science Outlook. We will then have time for some questions and answers, followed by a brief presentation of the planned next step by Mr. Ezra Clark, Chief of the Section, Science, Technology, and Innovation Policy. It is my pleasure to invite Dr. Lydia Brito, our Assistant Director General, Natural Science, to make her presentation. Thank you, Lydia.
Thank you very much, Xiaofeng. You can see I'm all surrounded by my team here. And it's a great opportunity because I think open science is such an inspiring movement that we are seeing around the world. And indeed, the team here in UNESCO, it's really working hard to make sure that that movement grows and really touch all the ecosystems, STI ecosystems around the world. So today I will try to give you a little bit the progress that we have done since the recommendation was approved, and then we will follow up with other more specific presentations. So the next slide, please. and really, first of all, adding my voice to Xiaofeng's thanks that you are here. It's good that we have member states that are interested in the work that UNESCO does in open science. And I think the reason why we are all here and we are all discussing open science is because we really need science more than ever to really address the huge challenges that we are facing at the level of our societies, at the level of environment, at the level of economic development. Science is everywhere. It affects, it changes, it transforms the way we act. It brings better quality of life, but it also brings more sustainable ways of living. And that's one of the biggest reasons why we need a science that is really open, that is for all, that can really impact the lives of everyone. And this is enshrined in the right to science on the Human Rights Declaration that says that not only all of us in the world should benefit from scientific findings and technology, but we also should participate in the creation of that knowledge of those technological developments. So when we talk about open science, we are indeed talking about the ability to have science that will respond to the needs of the human society, the planet, and the way we see our shared future. We also believe that with open science, we can bring to the STI ecosystems a different culture, a culture that really brings much more cooperation, much more working together, joint programs, because that's the sense of what open science means, is this integration, this inclusivity. Really, and the reason why UNESCO and you gave us the mandate to develop the recommendation of open science is because we know that we need really an action framework and a policy framework that could make us move together and create this movement that we are seeing now related to open science. And what also prompted us with you to develop this recommendation is because there was no consensus on the definition of open science, and also what values and principles should really guide an international movement on open science. And I think the UNESCO recommendation of 2021 that you approved gives this common definition of open science, but also defines clearly what are the principles and values that should be there in order to guide us as we promote open science. The next one, please. I'm sure that you know the recommendation. We are always talking about this recommendation. But maybe the first one that I think all of us should be very proud, this is really the first international normative instrument on open science. Before UNESCO and our member states approved the recommendation, open science initiatives were taking place everywhere in the world. The scientific community had already understood that they needed to open the science in order to respond better to the needs of society. But we didn't add that normative instrument that is common to all. It's also a recommendation that really addresses the role of multi-stakeholders. It's not just the scientific community, but it's really, there are actors in government, there are actors in the scientific community, the scientists themselves, but there are also the institutions, the higher learning institutions, the research institutions, the funders of science, the private sector that produce and uses science, in particular to develop new technologies. It also recommends, and I think is the richness of this recommendation, is that it recommends actions in different levels, knowing that it's really a movement and is really cross-scaling. You cannot just have a global instrument and think that open science will happen. You need to work at national level, you need to work at regional level, and you need to work at global, and these dimensions, they influence and talk to each other. It also proposes innovative approaches to open science at different stages of the creation of scientific knowledge. So it's also a guideline. If I want, as a scientist, if I want as a university, as a research center, how do I want to transform the scientific process? Where should I intervene in order to make it more open? And of course, it, as any our recommendations of UNESCO, it also calls for monitoring of the implementation of the recommendation, the implementation of the recommendation, and clearly the monitoring, it's also a way of learning with each other. The monitoring process will allow us to identify best practices. It will help us to identify barriers to a full implementation of this recommendation, and based on that will inform us what next actions we have to do. there are a few key pillars in our recommendation. Clearly, the open scientific knowledge, it's one of the key pillars of this recommendation. But what is interesting, I think, in this definition, what is open scientific knowledge, it's not only about publications and research data. That is what we discussed in the initial steps of talking about open science, but it goes even further. It talks also about software, source codes, hardware, education resources that can be available to all if they are released under an open license. The second pillar, and not least important, is the open science infrastructures. Science today needs big infrastructure, very sophisticated infrastructure. And the rate of change of technology is so high that it's very difficult for a country to really keep their scientific infrastructures by themselves. You need to have collaborations to build this big scientific infrastructure, and therefore you share that infrastructure, and therefore it's open infrastructure. And the European Union is a good example of that. Most of the big science, big research science labs and infrastructures, they are open to the members of the Union, and they are built in cooperation. We can talk on projects that are very much close to UNESCO. That's the case of, for example, Sesame in Jordan. It's an open infrastructure, a huge scientific infrastructure that is shared and used by scientists from all over the world. It has members that created the infrastructure, but they are also opening that infrastructure to other countries that cannot afford a scientific infrastructure of that nature. And the same CERN, that was also created in this house many, many years, 60 years ago. Again, is a good example of how, when countries get together to build big, strong infrastructure, indeed, it makes science advance, but also it benefits all. Another one is the open engagement of societal actors. One of the pillars of open science is co-design and co-production of knowledge. And we need that more and more. As you know, we start this year the Decade of Sciences for Sustainable Development. One of the big objectives of that decade, 10 years of putting science and technology at the center of development, is creating this culture of science in our societies so that any one of us, individually and collectively, we can use scientific knowledge, first to understand the world that surrounds us, and then to take the right actions to protect that world. To do that, you need to include society. When you co-design, when you co-produce scientific knowledge, because the communities, the societies, the members that are involved, what we call citizen science, really make these communities not only scientists and understanding better the scientific processes and the information that comes from the research, but it also makes the science more relevant and able to come with solutions that can indeed solve some of the challenges that are there. So it also means to make our scientific process much more inclusive and participatory. And finally, and as you know, UNESCO is the only UN agency that have a specific program on local and indigenous knowledge, and we study these systems of knowledge production. Another pillar of open science is how can we use all the knowledge that exists in society to really take the most of that knowledge to address the challenge we face. And that means to creating spaces that allows different knowledge systems to talk to each other, to contribute, and to make sure that the science and the knowledge we are producing is indeed relevant and useful for development. Next slide. In the recommendation, we also try to define certain areas of action. It's good to have the framework and the policy framework, but what can we really do in order to implement the recommendation and to make sure that our systems are based in the open science values and principles? One is, of course, making sure that at the country level we can promote the common understanding of open science and the benefits and challenges that we will face as we embark into our open science framework. Also, the policies, they are incredibly important. Just giving you an example, the way we define our funding priorities and criteria of selection can make the science more open or more closed. And that is normally a policy of the country. And therefore, you need that in order to change. You need to create that enabling environment at the policy level in order to promote open science. The other one is, of course, investing in infrastructure and services, and here again, doing that in collaboration with other countries. Because that's what ensures that that infrastructure is open. Many countries have already policies, and many regional groups, such as the European Union, have already policies that whatever investment they do in science infrastructure will be open, either for the country or for the region where that infrastructure belongs to. And this is important. These are policies that are very important, that when we decide to invest in science infrastructure, it's good that automatically we build a basis so that infrastructure will be open. Also, capacity building, and we have done quite a lot of capacity, and I think my colleagues will talk a little bit about that, in order to equip institutions and scientists to understand the concept and to see how can they use the values and principles in their research, in their projects, in their programs to make sure that indeed it's open. A culture of open science and aligning incentives for open science, and we have seen also in several parts of the world where incentives are created in order to promote open science. Again, looking at innovative approaches in the cycle or stages of the scientific process, but also making sure that we work together both at the international level, but also with the multi-stakeholder cooperation that indeed allow that all the actors that can create and make sure that open science is a reality. You need to have all the actors collaborating. The next one, please. So the interesting part, and that's why this recommendation is transformative, is that when fully applied, we create a shift in the culture of science, no? And the first shift is going from competition to cooperation. We are talking about sharing data, sharing human resources, sharing infrastructure, talking to other knowledge systems, to other partners and actors in the scientific production. Also, this shift that science, it's not a product. Science is mostly and foremost a process. And the process of thinking, of questioning, of gathering data, of checking assumptions and create new knowledge based on that. So it's important that we don't see science as a product and therefore a commodity, but that we see science as a process. And also this idea that science for a few or science for all. It's a big shift, and the shift that we need, and the shift that I hope during the decade we will be able to achieve. When you look back in 2033, we can all proudly say science is for all now. Next slide. So we We know that there are challenges for the implementation of the recommendation, and therefore there were some key priorities for action that we felt that we need to bring. One is this idea of the culture, looking at science really as something inclusive and participatory, and that multi-actors has a lot to contribute to the production of scientific knowledge and technological development. The other one, it's human and institutional capacity. We know that this is a challenge, so it means that we need to invest seriously in capacity building. Again, the issue of infrastructure. Not all regions have the same level of infrastructure, and here, for example, we speak about internet connectivity, but before I talked about the big science infrastructure that is very hard for a country to own by itself and to maintain and to use fully, where you need collaborations, and in many parts of the world we don't have enough collaboration, scientific collaboration, to allow for that. We also need incentives and funding, and of course, it's very important that we monitor the impact and also the action that is taking place. So the monitoring framework is quite important, and Ezra later on will speak about that. Next one. For us, what we have done to make sure that we could implement fully and could have enough expertise in open science to support us to develop tools. We create, first of all, our DG created the Open Science Steering Committee that really gives us strategic guidance and oversight. We have also created what we call the Global Open Science Partnership, where we have not only technical advice, but also mobilization of actors. We have 5 open science working groups that really help us to deliver in products, in tools, in evaluations. And finally, internally at the House, we have the intersectoral task team, because we work with all the other program sectors, because they also use open science principles and values, and therefore there is an internal coordination that we lead, but really incorporating all the work that other sectors are doing also in promoting open science. Next one. The key achievements that I can share with you. The first one, I think, it's this recognition of the recommendation. In the beginning, I spoke about the movement, and that's how I see it and how I feel it. Every time we have meetings and we talk to your ministers, your research, higher education institutions, there is this comprehension that we do need to move into a more open science. And I think that appropriation from the scientific community, because the open science community in this moment is mostly the scientific community, it's now trickled down to governments. And we are seeing that there are governments now that are saying open science is part of our policies, and they have to be there in order for us to take the most of the scientific progress. Also, we developed standards and guidance for the implementation of our recommendation. We look what are the impacts on policy development, several training courses, capacity building workshops, and really strengthen and expand partnerships and networking. Next one. Just to give you an idea about development of standards and guidance, we have developed several toolkits that guides and that allows governments, universities, research centers to really use and implement the recommendation. We also have the Open Science Outlook that was in the slide before, that will be presented to you, is the very first one. That look at some best practices to see what's happening really. We also developed the UNESCO Science Capacity Building Index and also UNESCO Index of Open Science Knowledge Sharing Platforms. We are also now, in terms of partnerships and networking, just to give you an example, we have over 70 institutions that are our open science partners. And in the working groups, the 5 working groups, we have around 700 experts from all over the world. Next one. Just to give you an idea on the policy development, we have now 11 countries that adopt more holistic open science policies and policies instruments. We also are seeing that are developments in how the scientific process takes place and what are the stages where you should intervene to make it more open. Integration of open science principles in STI policies, and we have been working also with the regional communities. Because again, open science is quite important for regional scientific collaboration, and we have several regional communities that have been working with us so that they can have an open science strategy. Again, capacity building, several trainings for young scientists, for policymakers, for universities, publishers, funders of science. Next slide. And I guess I stop here, and I want to thank you, and my colleagues Anna will follow, and then we open for questions and answers, because she will present a little bit more in detail what the Outlook showed us. And thank you again for being here and for listening to us. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Xiaofeng, and thank you, Lydia, and thank you all for coming. It's really a pleasure to see so many different representatives of different countries at this information meeting for open science. So I will give you some key messages, some key findings from this UNESCO Open Science Outlook. As Xiaofeng said, that was the first time that we tried to assess status and trends of open science around the different key pillars and elements of open science as it was defined in the recommendation of open science. For those of you who have been following a little bit the discussions on open science, we have had the tendency of looking into open access to scientific publications or open data, but really there was not a global outlook that would have a look at all the other elements of open science, including this open to society parts, which is the engagement with societal actors and engagement with other knowledge systems, including indigenous and traditional knowledge systems. So we really wanted to see a little bit where we are in that context. So I'll start right away with some key messages, please. Thank you. So the key messages, the highlights from the Outlook is that we have really seen that for open science to really reach its full potential, it has to be a truly global and equitable phenomenon. We cannot have pockets of open science in certain regions or for certain disciplines. It kind of really does have to permeate across the world and across the different systems of science. And unfortunately, we still have inequalities and inequities in science, technology, and innovation systems. They are across economic lines. They can be across also regional lines. So that is still something that then has an effect on open science practices as well. Of course, the context, the specific context, again, economic, social context, technological context in different countries, they also affect experience and prioritization of open science practices. So we see that in those regions and countries where the science systems are mature, open science also can mature a little bit faster, and it can kind of take on faster as well. The question is still, in terms of scientific and open science practices, who sets the norms and practices, who creates and has access to different systems. So all of these questions are still something that has been raised and is being raised as we look across science systems and as we look into the open science practices. We have seen, and we would like to think that that's also because of the Open Science Recommendation, that indeed there is a growing movement of open science, and there is a lot of different open science practices around the world, around the disciplines, around the regions, around the nationalities. But this movement and this growth is uneven. We have different barriers and obstacles, challenges, which again are related to the existing inequities and inequalities that we have been seeing before. And also we really see differences in uptake of open science practices among pillars of open science, among different disciplines, and across different socioeconomic contexts. As Lydia was saying before, and again, what we have seen through the evaluations and through the studies that we've done is that the transition to open science requires really a deep shift in the culture of science. It is not just by opening up access to scientific publications that we will unlock the potential of open science and we will reach open science objectives. You really have to kind of open up the entire process of science, open up the participation part, open up the benefits part of science, and really shift the culture of science towards the principles of openness. And that goes also hand in hand with the way in which we value and evaluate science and scientists, researchers. We have seen indeed that for the moment, the incentives for scientists, in particular young scientists, and the way their careers are evaluated is actually not in line with the principles of open science. As long as they will be evaluated based on how many publications they have in high-impact journals, most of which are not open access, it will be very difficult for them to then take up open science practices because they're not incentivized to actually do that. So this is something that, again, needs to change. And as Lydia was saying, we saw the real need to kind of change the entire system of science at different levels to be able to accommodate for openness. And of course, the recommendation and its 7 areas of action really do provide the structure and a valuable guidance on how to approach open science and how to shift systems towards open science. Another important point that we've seen also is that the collective, collaborative, and coordinated action is needed together with investment to accelerate the transition to a truly global and equitable open science. And when we look at partnerships for open science or partnerships for science, when we look at investment, international or bilateral investment in science, also the principles of openness and the principles of open science need to be included in those partnerships. So even the way we collaborate for science needs to change so that we can have open science functioning properly. Next slide, please. So just going a little bit backwards and telling you how we've created the Open Science Outlook. It was through the 5 working groups that Lydia was mentioning before that today have some 700 experts across the world, across the disciplines, across kind of actors of open science. And some of the colleagues who are here today from the delegations are also part of those working groups. And it's very, very valuable to have them in the working groups, providing their ideas or their perspectives or just questions around the issues that we are looking at. So we have these working groups on policy, capacity, infrastructures, incentive and financing, and monitoring, with over 700 participants from different regions with shared experience and expertise. And we've kind of collected, in a way, their different experiences, knowledge around open science practices in different instances and around those different priority areas to come up with the Open Science Outlook. Next slide, please. What we have looked with the Outlook is where do we stand now, where do we kind of want to be, and what are the different things that need to be put in place, and what are the different experiences and case studies to look into where we want to be in the future. And of course, we've also kind of taken into account what is happening in the broader societal context and technological context, including in terms of rising artificial intelligence and the discussion around the use of artificial intelligence tools, the open access movement and other movements that we can see in the world today. Next slide, please. One of the important things of the Outlook, and it seems like it's the basis, but we actually did not unpack why open science is important. And with the Outlook and from the experiences and inputs that we've received for the Outlook, we've managed really to kind of make it very clear why it is important and why it is beneficial to switch to an open science system. And what are the different benefits from individual, institutional, national, regional, and global levels? So it really goes from individual benefits of being able to access information and being able to access certain tools to more global benefits in terms of attaining global goals and attaining the right to science, for example, as Lydia was saying before. Of course, quality and integrity of science that is produced through open science is at the heart of the open science movement, and it really was one of the major benefits also that that we have seen mentioned by different people who have contributed to the Outlook as well. Next slide, please. Also, the Outlook looks into the spectrum of openness and how it actually moves, meaning that we cannot from one day to another shift from a closed system to a completely open system. There is a grade of kind of a pathway towards openness, and again, across the different pillars, where we are looking into greater openness of scientific knowledge, greater openness of infrastructures, and what are the different phases in a process of a country or of a specific disciplines in opening up their the different practices. So it is important to think, while thinking about developing a strategy on open science, it is important to think about this process and to think about these different phases that can occur while we are looking for an open science pathway. Next slide, please. What we have seen also, next slide, please. What we have also seen looking through the different literature and looking into what is available is really that the assessment of open science at the global level, there is no available, easy framework for assessment of open science. And in particular, there is a huge lack of assessment in the areas of open dialogue with other knowledge systems and open engagement of societal actors. And actually, even when we're looking into the evaluations and the numbers around open access to publication on open data, the current way of evaluating that open access does not give us an indication of the impact of that open access. We can have some numbers, but we are not yet sure, because we do not know how to measure it and nobody has been measuring it, what is the impact of that open access on the scientific community or on the broader society. So really what we've seen by looking into assessing open science is that there is need for a different monitoring framework with which we could actually be able to look into values and principles of open science, impact on society, impact on science, impact on scientists, with a much more focus on the people who are doing the science, who are benefiting from science, than the products of science. A number of scientific publications actually does not really tell us much about how many of those publications have been taken up by policymakers, by local communities, natural resource managers, or others. So it really is important that we start thinking, when we think about open science, also start thinking about impacts of open science. Next slide, please. But of course, we do have certain trends, and we have looked into certain indicators across the different pillars of open science. We can definitely see a rise of the percentage of scientific publications that is in open access. However, if we are to look the last 2 decades of scientific publications, we still only have 1/3 of all scholarly publications that are in open access. That means that over 70% of existing scientific publications, you need to pay for it to be able to access the information that is there. But as I said, if we only look, for example, at the last, at 2021, which was the last year that we looked at, you actually have 50% of publications in open access. So there is growth, and hopefully this growth will continue in time. However, again, just looking at this one number does not really give you an idea of what type of open access it is, because there are different ways in which different publishers have approached this issue of open science, or open science and open access. So we have instances in which, to be able to have open access for readers, publishers are actually asking authors to pay certain fees. So this is what we call the article processing charges. Turns out that this is now becoming a major challenge for open science. So this kind of economic model for open access doesn't seem to be working very well. There is other types of open access, such as the diamond open access, which actually sees access accessible, publications accessible both for readers and the authors, which is the way towards which we would really like to see open science going forward. We see that there is differences in open access, and it is important to look into the details, because that's where you see what the impacts may or may not be. And then, of course, there are different subject areas that have different accessibility and openness. We have seen, for example, in the case of COVID-19, that around 80% of scientific publications looking into COVID-19 were open access. That means that when there is will, you can definitely have open access for all, and these were actual open access, open for readers and for authors as well. But if we look at some of the other challenges, the percentage of open access is less. We are looking, for example, at climate change. Some 50% of publications related to climate change are in open access, again, meaning that half of the knowledge we have in the scientific publications are on climate change, which is one of the major challenges of today. You do not have access to that information unless you can actually pay for it. So something that needs to be changed there, definitely. Next slide, please. The monitoring of open research data sharing is in its early stages, but we do see that there is really a growth in the numbers of open softwares, open hardwares. There is a growing number also of repositories, open science infrastructure such as repositories or archives. But again, just from looking into the increase in these numbers, we don't really know who accesses those repositories, and if the sheer growth in the number of these repositories actually also means that there is increase in sharing of information, using the information that is there, etc. Next slide, please. In terms of assessing the engagement and dialogue, as I said, the monitoring mechanisms really are not yet among the mainstream factors, and in general in the science processes, engagement with citizen science or with other knowledge systems is not really part of the mainstream systems. Again, we do have some proxies that we can use as indicators for growth in engagement. Increases in funding, for example, for societal engagement, increases in recording numbers of citizens engaging in science or producing data products, increase in the number of scientific publications that are related to citizen science or use the citizen science data. Again, we have some of these indicators, but that doesn't really give us more information on the quality of this engagement and on the impact that it can have on the local environment. Next. So as I was saying, who has the capacity to engage? When are they engaged? All of these parts of the engagement process, it is very, very difficult to monitor, and there is very little data out there for the moment on all of these engagement processes. Next slide, please. Yeah. So what we have seen and what we have then looked at in the Outlook is really this need to be able to change the culture of science. There is need to increase the capacities, make sure that the infrastructures are in place to make it easy, make sure that incentives are in place so that it is rewarding also to make open science. Funding needs to be in place, policies have to be in place to kind of make it also required, and monitoring to look into the impacts, including possibly some unintended consequences of open science. So what we have looked a little bit in the Outlook is different case studies that would illustrate how you can actually do these parts of the shifting system to be able to move towards open science. And actually the feedback that we've received from the open science community for the moment, they very much appreciated these case studies, this exchange of information, of experiences, because everybody is still really learning about how open science should work. It's not something that can just happen from one day to another. So it's very interesting, the case studies that we've collected that look into, you know, how you can do better some of these things. Next slide, please. So I'll stop there. We are here to respond to your questions, and we really do hope that you will be able to disseminate the Outlook in your capitals, within your communities. For the moment, we have English and French, but we are hoping very soon to have all the 6 languages of the Outlook available. And then again, open science working groups are open to all of you as well if you would like to be part of the discussions that we are having in those working groups. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Anna. And let's open the floor for some discussion if you have any question and also comments. And as you can see, we have some, substantial progress, but we also face a lot of challenge if we want to move forward together. Thanks. Yeah, please. Can you also say who you are and where you're from? Yeah.
I'm from the Netherlands. Thank you very much. First, for this meeting, extremely useful. It would be wonderful if it could be taped and put on the website of UNESCO so that my colleagues can see it, but we will brief them. This is very clear also. Thank you also to you for spending time with us, the meetings that we had, which is also very useful. I imagine that if you give the same time to all 194 member states, it would be difficult to work, so thank you very much for that. And also thank you for the brochures, because indeed we will share this with our capitals. We don't use paper that much, but exceptionally we will do with this, because it's really the type of toolkit that we would like to share. We have 2 questions. The first is about the landscape, the open science landscape. What are the actors that play a role? What's the competition that UNESCO has? And if we can have an overview of that. And the second one is about something that we discussed together on open science dialogues. Where does this stand for the moment? The Netherlands is from region 1. What could we do? What is still needed in that respect? Thank you.
Yeah, please.
Thank you very much. From Latvia, first of all, thank you for this presentation and the update. Latvia has a very good cooperation with the UNESCO, first of all, in the form of engaging in the development of the recommendation itself, but of course also in organizing national events in Latvia. And a special thanks to Anna Persic for being for providing such a continuous support for Latvia and contributing to the discussions. And just at the beginning of this year, we also had the pleasure of having you participating online in Riga. So UNESCO recommendation has really had a wide resonance in Latvia. And one of the current priorities is the research data and data stewardship. And I think I want to also agree that this is a very important area, and our National Data Stewards program is to be launched, and within this we are preparing data stewards with the aim to support scientists in the area of data management in line with the FAIR principles. And there's also a positive movement in the area of citizen science. But I think that in this area particularly, I think UNESCO can be very, very maybe more supportive and more vocal, because the citizen science maybe still needs more. There needs to be more kind of advocacy for citizen science in the member states. So perhaps this is something that we would like to highlight. But certainly, again, very, very great thank you for your support. And our experts are also very interested in the implementation of recommendation in other countries, in other member states. So perhaps you can comment on the possibilities to engage of the national experts in those global fora and global expert formats. Thank you so much.
Beaucoup pour cette présentation et sur tous les documents mis à notre disposition qui nous permettent d'avoir vraiment beaucoup d'informations sur cette recommandation. Et nous avons noté aussi les obstacles, certaines limites et certaines inégalités par rapport à l'évolution de la science dans les différents pays. Ma question, c'est surtout le rôle des chaires UNITWIN. Quel est leur rôle par rapport à quel niveau ils interviennent dans cette coopération et technique autour de cette science ouverte? Merci beaucoup.
Okay, I think maybe we can ask Anna to give some answers. Yeah.
Okay, great. So thank you very much for the questions and also for thanking us for the support as well. It really is a pleasure to work with member states while they're developing their strategies or looking into different programs that they want to develop around open science. In terms of the question on the open science landscape and the different actors, and in particular the competition with UNESCO, I would have to say that really, in terms of open science, it is kind of a niche for UNESCO at the international level at this moment. We do not, at least to my knowledge, we have never seen any other agency or any other international institution claiming this space or providing kind of more guidance in the context of open science. I think when we say that one of the key achievements is really the recognition of the recommendation at the international level as a guiding framework for open science, it really is true. When you talk to people who are in the science systems or open science communities, they do recognize the UNESCO recommendation and they do not question the recommendation. So I really think it is an excellent place for UNESCO to be. The credibility is there. The tools, resources are there. The experts are really coming to UNESCO to work together towards implementation of the recommendation and putting into practice open science. For example, of course, in terms of, really the open science space is very big in the sense that we are not only talking about scientists, traditional scientists and traditional universities, and traditional places where science is done, but we also talk about citizen scientists, we talk about entrepreneurs in a way, we talk about innovators, we talk about legal scholars, because, having open science, open doesn't mean necessarily free for all, it doesn't mean always open, so working with legal scholars to understand under which circumstances, which parts of open science can be open and how. Again, there's lots of different actors that need to be engaged, and we again haven't seen another international agency that was taking up that space of also working with the different actors. Ezra will talk about it a little bit later, but for example, we will be working with WIPO to look into intellectual property and open science connections. And again, it was very natural for WIPO to come to us or us to come to WIPO around those issues. So that's on that question. With regards to, sorry? Yes, of course. Then the International Science Council, CODATA, all of these international organizations are working very closely with UNESCO on the implementation of the recommendation, and also kind of then disseminating the values of the recommendation and the action framework with their own communities and their own networks. So really, I mean, for the moment, in that sense, it has been a pleasure working in this area because it really is a space for UNESCO there. Coming back to Latvia, it's always great to see how different countries gradually develop their systems and how their priorities can shift from one aspect to another as it's being developed. So that is very much appreciated, and we do hope that we are going to collect all kinds of different cases, including country cases, on the development of the open science system. So we will come back to Latvia to get some of the experiences from you, and happy to engage, of course, your experts in international collaborations. Just for the Open Science Dialogue, which was another question from the Netherlands, the idea there was, because we have the monitoring of the recommendation coming up this year, the idea was to have some kind of regional dialogues or trainings around the implementation or around the monitoring of the recommendation. So we still kind of have to figure things out. We do want these regional trainings, workshops to happen. They would be dialogues on what is already happening on open science, but in a view of countries reporting back to UNESCO on the implementation of the recommendation. So the idea is to have the 6 regional dialogues or trainings on monitoring, and we'll get back to you if there is interest to host some of those dialogues. And I think the last question was on the implication of UNESCO chairs, if I understood correctly. For the moment, we have had them very much involved, those that are relevant for open science. We have had them very much involved in the work of our open science working groups. We have a few chairs that are extremely active also in working with us on the monitoring framework, assessments, values, looking beyond the traditional measurements of science in a way. And we've also had a conference, the Global Conference of UNESCO Chairs, that had a specific session on open science, where there was discussion on how can chairs better contribute to the implementation of the recommendation. So we see them really as key knowledge partners and also kind of ambassadors for open science practices in their countries and in their regions. Yeah.
Can just add a few things. The first one is related to the issue of the open science dialogues, the monitoring framework, and the regional capacity. And going back to the issue of Burkina Faso on inequalities, we really believe that we do need to work at the regional level. A lot of the pillars that we have in the recommendation will be easier to implement the actions if the regions work together. And that's why, as you saw in my slides, we are already in the African continent working with some of the regional communities, because we believe that some of the barriers that we may see in some countries, some regions, can be more easily overcome if the countries get together and really define an investment. And I don't know if you are aware that UNESCO is supporting the African Union to look at the CISA 2024, that is the STI policy and strategy for the African Union. We will be presenting this in the STI African Regional Forum, and we will support African Union also to prepare the 2030 CISA. That we hope to again be the knowledge partner for the African Union. And there, one of the areas that I discussed with the Commissioner is the issue of open science in Africa. And we do have an open science platform in Africa that came before even than our recommendation, but it's fully integrated and a great partner of our partners and also experts. So the open science dialogues and developing and looking at barriers to implement the recommendation are linked, because we believe that in these open science dialogues we can identify the barriers, but also how to overcome them. on citizen science, and we'd love to, and thanks for bringing that. That's centered also to the recommendation. For example, we are doing much more of citizen science in our reserves, in the biosphere reserves, in our geoparks, and now working with the cultural sector to see if we also can involve the communities in monitoring changes in the natural sites, the World Heritage natural sites. Because we do believe that there is a potential for the communities that are day-to-day there to really, based on scientific methods, to monitor the changes, and then using the data to come up with solutions that make sense in the context where they are. So definitely the open science is also the citizen science aspect. It's now permeating very much all the other programs that we have in the sector. And finally, and maybe you will talk about that, but we are very, very happy to say that we will have the first conference, international conference on open science in September. And we really hope that with your support, we can mobilize the different actors that we need to really discuss open science, not only the governments, but also presidents of universities, directors of big scientific infrastructure and research institutes, and of course our partners from the science community and scientists, to really go into depth in some of the barriers, but also the achievements and opportunities that we are seeing in this movement. And it's a way really to really ignite this movement, and really, like Anna said, I think when we speak about open science, UNESCO is in the front run. And what you have to realize is that, first of all, the recommendation itself took 2 years of very deep consultation, where I think the credibility also of those consultations and the openness of those consultations create that niche. But even before we start developing the recommendation, we were already promoting and doing a lot of the pillars and implementing principles and values of open science in our scientific programs. So we were already implementing scientific programs that have had already the principles and values of open science. And therefore, it's almost natural to say UNESCO is indeed doing, putting now in a much more open and inclusive way this framework that can indeed change the way science is done, but at the same time can impact and can increase the impact of science to development, to sustainable development. So I think we are all very proud that indeed the credibility and the leadership of UNESCO in open science it's there. I mean, you can't imagine how many invitations we receive to global meetings to really talk about open science and the recommendation, and what are the tools and strategies that we are promoting in order to make science more open. Thank you.
Thanks, Lydia. Maybe we can still have another 1 or 2 questions. Yeah, please.
Merci beaucoup au secteur des sciences naturelles et exactes d'avoir organisé cette réunion qui est la très bienvenue. Et nous savons tous combien le travail qui est fait par vous est important et marque la différence. Je voudrais poser 2 questions qui sont très éloigné du cerne de cette question. Je ne vais pas poser une question en rapport avec les chercheurs, avec les universitaires, avec les laboratoires, mais je serais très intéressée de savoir, par exemple, vous venez d'annoncer la réalisation de cette conférence internationale sur la science ouverte au mois de septembre. C'est une très belle initiative et je pense qu'elle vient à point nommé dans le développement du travail autour de la recommandation. Et la question que j'aimerais voir répondre est, est-ce que ce genre d'événement permet une stratégie associant aux travaux, par exemple les organes de presse de divulgation scientifique, pas trop spécialisés, précisément ceux qui permettent de transmettre ensuite une information accessible au public en général. Et quel est l'intérêt que vous voyez dans la pratique pour le citoyen lambda d'avoir une connaissance plus approfondie sur ce que c'est que la science ouverte et en quoi ça le bénéficie? Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Yachan.
Thank you, Lydia and your team. I want to acknowledge the efforts your team, I know it's not a big team, been doing, and I want to salute the achievement they've been made since the adoption of this recommendation on open science. I know it's a huge amount of work. Less than 2 years, they have been achieved such great achievement. It's really amazing. I have one comment. Since recently, there are a lot of discussions about the upcoming executive board meeting, and I found that member states seems has very few discussion on science topics. On the one hand, it might means that member states are very satisfied with your work, but on the other hand, I think it might be, to have more, to show or to showcase the impact of science in policy making, in changing life of people, the visibility of science, the importance of science. So this is something I want to comment that it seems not really very visible compared with education, with other issues. Thank you.
I think there are no, maybe you want to? Yeah.
Start, and maybe I start with this last one. And thank you for asking more visibility. We are indeed ready to really have more visibility to what the science, natural science sector is doing. As you know, I just arrived a few months ago, but I'm from this sector, and in the field I have been seeing the impact of the programs that we have in water, in earth sciences, in environmental sciences, in STEM education, in science policy, and open science. And so I hope indeed that you are happy with our performance, but also recognizing that one of the areas that we need to probably have more visibility of our programs here at headquarters, but also in the member states. It was one of the areas that was identified as a science team when we did our retreat in the end of last year, that we need to work in a stronger communication and visibility strategy for our programs. So count on a little bit more increase of seeing more information meetings, more conferences that can highlight the importance of science for sustainable development. And we believe that the decade will be very important for that also. We are now with partners organizing the decade, the Secretariat, the steering committee, and we will be engaging with you on the decade. And we do hope that the decade indeed will showcase what UNESCO is doing in the science sector. In this board, we will have a few items. Normally, they are not controversial, so maybe they don't have a lot of discussion. But for example, Reza talked about that, the survey on the recommendation, the implementation of the recommendation that we hope you will approve so that we can start working with your governments and institutions to report into the implementation of our recommendation. Going back to the media and the importance of society to understand open science, I think is fundamental, really. And that's why we say the engagement with society is one of the pillars of the recommendation. You do need to engage with society, and for that you need the media and scientific media. This is one of the areas that we used to work very strongly, and somehow we lost a little bit that contact with media. But I think with the open science movement, we have been very fortunate because we got attention of important scientific media on the work that UNESCO is doing in the implementation of the recommendation, but also of researchers on open science. In many publications, the recommendation is mentioned as the framework, the international framework that should be used in order to advance open science. So indeed, in these conferences, we try as much as possible to engage also science journalists, because there is a message that needs to reach, and when you look to communities engaging in citizen science, if they don't understand the importance of their participation in the co-design and co-production of knowledge, they will not engage. So you do have to have that culture of science in societies if you really want to advance science, but also to use science for better decision-making processes. So definitely it's a yes. Maybe just another piece of information, and also because I was looking to the distinguished representative of Brazil, UNESCO is the knowledge partner for the group on innovation and open innovation. And we are the only knowledge partner in that group, and it has to do with the work we are doing in open science and open innovation, because indeed it's an area that a lot needs to be done. And therefore we will be participating in the technical and ministerial meetings related to open innovation and research. And we are very, very thankful to Brazil for opening that space to UNESCO. But again, it's one of the examples that says that on this, UNESCO in effect is the leader on open science and open innovation. Thank you.
Thank you. Because of time and reason, maybe we will no duties continue this question and answer session. But if anybody have any question, and feel free to reach any of us, and we're always available. And next, I will invite Dr. Ezra Clark to guide us through the next step. What the next we want to do.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Xiaofeng. So I hope from the presentations and ensuing discussions that you can see that some good progress has been made since the recommendation was adopted in November 2021. Now, looking really to the future, there's certainly lots to be done. And firstly, we'll look at our immediate priorities and activities for this coming year, and then a little bit towards the biennium. I'll give you a very brief overview that will cover a huge amount of work, a lot of commitments for, as was acknowledged, a small team. And in fact, the team is essentially, including its management, what you see in front of you today, combined with a, if I may say, rather modest budget. So we have a lot to do. We have quite exciting ideas, suggestions, proposals that have come from this collaborative approach. And for many of these things, as was mentioned before, we very much rely on your support to be able to deliver these and to be able to implement them. So the first thing, and it's been mentioned a couple of times, and of significant importance for this year certainly, as with all UNESCO statutory instruments, there's a reporting phase. And for the Open Science Recommendation, 4 years after its adoption, 2021, will be 2025. So we now have to start, well, we have already started. And in fact, what will be presented to you at the next Executive Board is the monitoring framework for the Open Science Recommendation. So the survey, which, again, following this kind of consultative approach that's been used through the development of the recommendation and in drafting and crafting this survey, which will be presented to you, this will be for your consideration in this upcoming Executive Board in the Conventions and Recommendations Committee, which will be running from the 13th to the 15th of March. So we very much look forward to your participation in that and support for this survey. Associated with that, and again has been mentioned, many of the things have already come up because obviously they're important things that we've done and will continue, is this regional trainings, these dialogues, and Anne mentioned this, and this really is, rather than just landing a survey and hoping that it will be completed, we really want to get useful, quality feedback. So as again was mentioned, the differences in the regions and countries, some may need more support, some information may be harder to get. So we'll are planning to have a series of national, regional briefings and trainings really to provide support to ensure the best possible results from all the member states for this survey. And then the deadline, so this will be carried out in the period, the remaining part of this year following the Executive Board, and the reporting deadline will be February 2025 to be able to go through the processes to get it to the General Conference. Again, as came up, I think ADG mentioned the working with regional communities. So I think she mentioned the Southern African Development Community, the Economic Community of West African States, ASEAN, and the East African Science and Technology Commission, and as well assistance with specific countries. This was mentioned in the sense what we're already doing, so some of these things are continuations, and we'll continue to provide support to these regional, sub-regional and national organisations and governments in their open science policy development. We also have committed to the creation of an open science platform. So we're really considering exactly how that can best be done and exactly where that sits and how that fits with the existing platforms and how that's developed. So that's something we're committed to and are working on, and we'll have to deliver this year. The Open Science Toolkit you had an overview of, and I shall mention that in my next slide, some of the specific elements we're working on. But again, these are things which, if any of the representatives are engaged in the working groups, you'll be aware of. And all of these products, fact sheets, briefings, guides, and so on, have been developed in a consultative approach with our partners, principally through these working groups. And again, we have a number of events, meetings, conferences, and so on, which I shall briefly mention. So I'm going to again mention this consultative approach because it was what was used in the development of the recommendation, but also, as was mentioned, the steering committee, which the Director General established, the various working groups, and the intersectoral task team really are providing the guidance and strategic overview and the directions we should be going, and even down to specifics of the products and tools that we're making. And you were told that the size of these partnerships is rather large, so something 700 partners and around 70 partner organisations. One of the outcomes of the Open Science Outlook was we had lots of good examples that couldn't all fit in. So we're looking at this compendium of good practices and expanding this as a kind of online, in a sense we can say annex or compendium to the Open Science Outlook, where we can continually add good practices. And we have some specific elements in production. A brief on incentives, and we had some discussion a little bit about the importance of incentives, particularly for academic careers, but the broad incentives in the broader scope. A brief, a guide and a checklist, so 3 elements on sharing data in times of crises. And this is developed, again, with a partner, so the International Science Council CoData. And this is a product which is making good progress and has good engagement with partners, and will be produced as an output, I think, by the end of the year, or in the 3rd quarter maybe. The issue of open science and intellectual property rights is something which always comes up and is a big and important issue. And as was mentioned, we're developing this and with WIPO. So this another product which we're expecting soon. A brief on dialogue with other knowledge systems. Again, this was raised several times here, and something very important, and this element is enshrined, is contained within the recommendation itself. So it's really some briefing about how this happens and how this could and should happen. A guide on institutional action plans, guide for institutions on for open science. A briefing on equity in scientific publishing and the future of science communication. And the issue of course, of artificial intelligence is, certainly the issue of the day. And more it's coming up in our discussions in various elements from specific technical issues all the way to ethics. So we are working on a brief on open science, again with a significant partner, in this case the Royal Society in the UK. So a number of elements here. We're also, again, with this approach, seeking guidance. Are there areas that we should be working on? Are there products which would be useful, that would be needed? And we can, of course, be flexible in providing tools and guidance in the areas that are necessary. And then certainly, sorry, just before this last slide, the picture there of the Outlook says Outlook 1. And when it was described as being a kind of first overview and outlook, a baseline of where we are. The assumption, this is Outlook number 1, there will be an Outlook number 2. This is a slightly longer plan, but certainly there we'd like to see some trends and changes from the first edition of the Outlook. So I think you'll agree a fairly ambitious work plan that we need to deliver with, I shan't repeat the size of the team. And then if we just quickly go on to the next slide, please, which is some key events. Now, some of these events are events which we're participating in as partners, and some where they're principally our events. So the first 3 have already happened. The top one, in fact, is the one we're all sitting in today. We mentioned the meeting hosted by Netherlands and Germany for the national commissions, which was 20th of February. We had a large, and I hope many of you were there, the working group session where we brought all the working groups together really to go through the outlook and then plans and direction for the year. And then we have some things coming up. And the one I would really like to highlight, as ADG mentioned before, is this Open Science Conference, which will be hosted in China. We're finalizing the details. I would say they're final now, so the information will be shared with you soon, as will invitations to participate and to suggest partnerships. We want this to be a big meeting, a very useful meeting with a range of stakeholders, and certainly to pick up the point on Portugal to see how these sometimes technical discussions, sometimes complicated things can also be of interest to the wider public, and people can understand not only the importance of science but the importance of open science to their daily lives, not just academics, not just people who work in, you know, these specific fields. Maybe I'll just as well highlight the meeting, the STI ministerial meeting, that will be held in Colombia in October, bringing together science ministers. And again, of course, in this, the open science element runs throughout this, as it does in all these areas. So, World Science Forum, and then a proposed meeting in South Africa on equity in open science. So, I think that gives you with the products, the outputs, guides, briefings, and so on, the trainings, the capacity buildings to support the monitoring framework, and this series of meetings. It will be rather a busy year, and I'll repeat our hope for your support in delivering these. So please, any questions? Maybe I'll leave that to the chair to see if we have any time for questions now, but if not, please be in touch with us. We'll provide those, and if the presentations are required, we can, of course, share those. But with that, I will say thank you very much.
Yeah, if you have some burning question, and please continue to what Ezra just introduced. Otherwise, I think I would invite you to our Assistant Director General, Lydia, to make the close remarks to close our meeting.
Well, thank you very much, and I do hope that this will continue. Now we are discussing open science. We'll bring in other topics of the natural science sector, also for your information. But on this specific topic, we really need your support. From the beginning, you have been the key drivers also of making this recommendation a reality, supporting us to have a deep consultation throughout globally and with different actors, and we continue to need your engagement to really make sure that this movement doesn't stop. We will be discussing the survey that will be put at your decision, and indeed we think will be very important for us to have the status from all the member states in the implementation of the recommendation, because again it will help us to identify barriers, opportunities, best practices that can then be drivers for even a stronger movement on open science. And again, we are more than open to discuss with you also programs, be them at national, regional, or globally. If you are interested in joining us and supporting us in specific areas of the implementation of this recommendation, of course, we are more than open to have a more deeper discussion. How can we make this movement stronger? And really, finally, I really want to thank my team, because it's a very small team, very little money, and it's really a sign that when a team is open and competent, gets a lot of support. So they are being supported by many, many organizations and individuals that have really put the time to help us to develop these tools. But of course, more support is always needed, and we count on you to continue to promote this important instrument of UNESCO. Thank you very much, and a pleasure to be with you today.
Thank you.